Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 189 of Show Fever. Today we'll be going over episode 1168 of the One Piece anime. This episode starts off with us seeing as Loki continues to interact with the Holy Knights, with Shamrock and Gunko. And we see as Shamrock's like, you know what? I'm tired of this. So he ends up ultimately deciding that, yo, Loki, I'm just going to leave this up to you. So he ultimately ends up whipping, well, actually, he speaks for Loki a little bit before. And we see how Loki mentions that he looks a lot like Red Hair Shanks. And then Shamrock goes, in fact, Shanks is his younger twin brother. I know, crazy big reveal, but I don't believe there's anyone who's anime only who hasn't been spoiled for that already. But yeah, so we see, and then he's like, you know what, Loki, I'm tired of this. So he ends up whipping out his blade, Cerberus. And now his blade is kind of like Spondum's, where it has consumed a devil fruit, and it has consumed the Cerberus fruit. And we see as Cerberus ends up forming a very cool looking scene in the anime. And ultimately, we then see as Shamrock then uses an attack called Scramble, and this ultimately leads to blades shooting out of each of Cerberus's three heads, and then like their collars start to spin, and then all their heads detach. And Shamrock goes to walk off with Gunko, and ultimately he's like, you know what, Loki, if you end up surviving this, you can come fight me, and we'll fight. I'll fight my heart out. But yeah. So then see as they go off, and they mention about how they're going to plan to kidnap the kids, but they also want to bring in one other of the Holy Knights as Shamrock commands Gunko. So then we see as the Cerberus heads up to fly through the forest and all that, they all start coming at Loki, and Loki's like, oh crap. And they all end up hitting him right like the abdomen and chest area, the thoracic cavity. But yeah, so after this, we see then as we go to, I believe it was the first perspective we went to, yeah, it was Zoro, Nami, and Luffy. And we see as they're in Aris Castle, they're talking with the Giants. The Giants are like, yo, Shanks came and attacked us. And Luffy's like, no, Shanks wouldn't do that. And we see as he kind of contemplates on this a little bit until ultimately he comes to the conclusion, you know, Shanks never really told me about his family, so it must be Shanks' brother, which is kind of like big brained for Luffy, because I mean, I was not expecting him to deduce this down to he doesn't know obviously for certain, but he came to the correct conclusion, even though it was through goofy Luffy logic. But yeah, so we see this, and he's ultimately just kind of denying at all that Shanks would ever do something like this. But yeah, so then after that, we end up going to the perspective of Franky, and we see that Franky and Ripley are kind of going about the Atom Tree, and Franky's freaking out about all the Atom wood everywhere, and Ripley's like, you know what, maybe I should sell, and Franky's like, no, you shouldn't sell because it's a sacred tree, and Saul told me that. But yeah, so ultimately we then see as he comes up on this mural, and he starts contemplating it, and Ripley kind of gives him the backstory of it. And then we end up swapping over to, and I'll kind of explain the backstory when I explain what Robin's doing. So then we end up going back to the Owl Library. We see as Robin is reading a book with Saul and Chopper, and this is the Harley, which is essentially the Bible of Elbaf, and it tells the story of the Sun God, which is their main deity. But yeah, so what we see is it tells the story of the three worlds so far. And it mentions the first world about how it came to pass and all of that, and how humans attempted to touch the Forbidden Sun and ultimately came to a conclusion because of this. Then we see the second world where the forest god reigns supreme and all of that. And then we see the third world where the sea god has risen. And this is presumably our world, though we can't know for certain, but it is presumed to be the world that they currently exist in. And there's in total 5 chapters of the Harley, so there are 4 or 5 worlds that exist and therefore are beyond the current world. But yeah, so we see this is discussed and all of that, and then we kind of see as this coincides along with Franky observing the mural, because the mural kind of displays all that has happened throughout the worlds in a like pictogram and kind of, I guess, picturesque way of doing it rather than the words that the Harley provides. This is referred to as the Harley mural most of the time, because as Ripley stated, it was made by some children likely 800 or 900 years ago, which is during the Void Century and all of that. So also during this we see as people partying. We see as Usopp and all of Jinbei and Brook are still partying with the Giants, and we then see as Stanson and Haruden ultimately agree, yo, we gotta do our thing. So they start busting the Nika dance. We see as Saul ends up showing Robin and Chopper the Nika dance because it was pertinent to the discussion that was within the Harley. And all of them start grooving and boogieing. And that's honestly really where the episode ends. We see, like I said, the Harley is explaining all of that. Like, it wasn't too intensive, but we did get a lot of good lore. And, I mean, the first part with Shamrock, Gunko, and Loki was very cool. I really love the animation of that because it was utterly phenomenal. And then we got some good lore. Now, I mean, this lore isn't necessarily anything crazy, but it is kind of the basis for what we believe will happen in the final war saga of One Piece. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of speculation on the Harley and all that about what certain aspects are, because this is believed to essentially be a prophecy for what will happen with Luffy and gang, since Luffy is now Nika. But, yeah, so, like I said, I don't believe I really missed anything, because it was Obviously, just like 20-minute episode, and there wasn't too much besides that. Yeah. So I think that was all there was for episode 1168 of One Piece. That's all I really have for episode 189 of Shelf Review. So thank you very much for watching.